Hello, guys. My name is Partha Srinivasan, and welcome to another episode of the East Podcast. We are a podcast that basically simplifies all aspects of engineering, applied sciences, and technology, making it easier for you to understand. So, while you interact with technology on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis, sometimes it may occur to you, sometimes you may have the question as to how do things work, how does this technology work, how does it affect you. So I'm here today with a lot of different guests across different episodes, and today we have an episode on upskilling using technology and how this will affect you. But before that, we're going to jump in and find out a little bit about our guest. And we have with us Mr. Samriddh Dasgupta, who is the VP with Akiva Superfoods, a health food company with a strong layer of food and consumer tech. He's worked in the field of automation for global ITES firms, and then he's consulted on the future of work as well. Uh, Samriddh has been working in the fields of automation and consumer tech, and he's trying to kind of build a balance as to how these things will affect you in the long run. And today, hopefully, we will be able to address a few questions that you may have, but I hope he's able to address a lot of questions that I have based on the conversations we've been building on. So, Samriddh, thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you, Partha. Glad to be here.
I know I introduced you a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit about yourself and your journey so far and how it's relevant to what we're going to be talking about going forward on this episode.
Excellent. Thank you. I started in the field of marketing around 16, 17 odd years back. Nascent days when technology was just about hitting the landscape. From then till now, I have had the privilege of working with various firms where I have been firsthand exposed to emerging tech, new adoptions of tech. As you pointed out, I worked with an ITS firm for a little while where one of the key elements that we were working on was how automation can be delivered through a more humanization of the process and what it really means for very large scale industries. Uh, Currently, I work with a consumer tech company, but what that really sort of brings to the table is the breadth of engagement that I've had with tech in various capacities, and how that sort of has permeated our daily lives right now. I work very closely with marketeers. I work very closely with developers and coders. And what we are trying to do in our ecosystem is sort of build an understanding of tech and what that really means for emerging industries and consumers as we go ahead.
Awesome. So we keep talking about terms like robotics, AI, ML, and NLP, and all of this has got to do a lot with automation. And you have RPAs as well. So probably you could give us a little bit of, a very core understanding of what these technologies are. Just a high level sort of thing, if you can.
Sure. When these are very overarching terms, right? So there is automation, which is one large scale term. And then when we look at automation, we broadly sort of there's this there's this perspective that robots are really going to take over.
Right.
I have heard this many times that is the future almost a Jetsonian future where will I have, let's say, robots running around and doing everything, and would I be rendered useless, almost to that effect, right?
Right.
So let's step back a little bit, right? Let's step back a little bit and let's really look at where we are today. And obviously, we've come a long way from the time uh, that engineering has moved to a point where there is an advent of automation and autonomics on the overall ecosystem.
Hmm.
But what automation truly means, right, is a set of complex or simple tasks which follow a set process,
Hmm.
and that process being able to replicate. So if you can replicate that process with minimal human intervention or almost zero human intervention,
Right.
right? Thereby removing human bias,
Hmm.
thereby removing unproductiveness, and thereby removing any kind of error almost. That is where automation comes in, right? So it's a very, very simplistic way of looking at automation, which is if there is a process and that process needs to be done repeatedly,
Hmm.
can we build a machine to do that process over and over again, right?
Right.
And when I say a machine, that machine does not necessarily need to be a physical machine. It can also be a code that sits or a program that sits
Right.
on your phone or on your device or on your enterprise, right? So it can sit on the cloud. It can be an application that sits on your phone. It can be an application that sits on your desktop or your tablet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that enables you to do one task over and over again with a certain degree of intelligence and with increased degrees of efficiency.
Okay.
We also use the term automation, right? So let's look at that, right? To understand automation, I think let's understand the centerpiece of technology where we are right now.
Right.
It's really the ability that machines have where they're able to mimic the actions, which they learn, as I said, by repetitive patterns. And what happens is that machines end up consuming very large quantities of historical data, which sort of enables them to build a certain set of predictive modeling, right?
Okay.
Now these are patterns. The way I see it, Partha, it's if a machine was to hear you and me talk, and if we keep using similar terms and phrases, and there is a certain intonation and there's a certain voice modulation to it, that machine, after listening to probably many hours of us talking, would be able to set a predictive pattern in terms of after how many words would we say something, right? So imagine it from this perspective that if there is a repetitive pattern, now that pattern can be in terms of language, it can be in form of text, it can be in form of images, it can be sound. It's essentially anything that can be clustered and labeled, and that then can be put through a very sort of structured form where a machine says, this is what this person/task is aiming to achieve. And therefore, these are the steps that it's taking to achieve that particular outcome. Once the machine has been able to learn that, it turns that into a process. Now, that's where the term sort of robotic.
So now you're bordering on artificial intelligence. So basically what you're saying is that the machine is learning and therefore it's able to kind of deduce and create a pattern and saying, okay, I've learned this and now I can apply this. So that's basically what you kind of just
within certain guardrails, right? So there are certain guardrails that are obviously set for any machine to have a very deep impact on what artificial intelligence really brings to the table.
Right.
What I'm really indicating is what a robotic process automation looks like.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So there are two forms to a robotic process automation. One is at a very large scale, sort of an industrial robotic process automation, right? Where you have, let's say, a task like insurance papers being filed, right? Or claims being filed. Now, what happens is you scan documents. Now, we're talking about millions and millions of documents coming in. You scan those documents. Now, imagine a situation where through recognition of certain characters, the machine is able to recognize which document goes where.
Correct.
Now, traditionally, that's been done by humans. Right? A claim coming in can have any kind of human bias to it, right? It can have human error, it can have human bias, it can have anything.
Correct.
There is a productivity and outcome impact on any form. Now, with a machine taking over, the machine has been put through scores and scores of data, and that data essentially enables the machine to look at any kind of scan coming in from an insurance claim. And by virtue of ticking off the boxes, by virtue of being able to recognize certain characters, by virtue of being able to recognize whether there's a certain legitimacy to the document, which is cross-linked to the parameters that has been fed to that particular machine at a certain stage, the machine is able to look at each data set with absolute certainty whether that data set, which in this case is the claim form, needs to be processed or not processed, right? So it's approved, not approved, declined. So
correct.
So forth. Now, when we look at something as complex as insurance, for that matter, right, or healthcare, right? Now, these are deep-rooted sort of human lives and emotions at stake here, and not to mention the financial implications of a machine going wrong. And machines can go wrong.
Correct.
Therefore, we are at a stage where and almost all sort of robotic process automation or any sort of machine-human handoff goes through this journey where, in the beginning, what happens is that you have a human first, machine second approach.
Correct.
So what's really a human first, machine second approach is that the human is doing a certain task and the machine is learning from that task. right? So the machine recognizes that this human is doing this thing over and over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So certain amount of predictive modeling there.
Okay.
The second stage is where it's a machine first and a human second. So imagine a situation where the machine now has learned enough, and the human comes in to check whether the machine is doing the right job or not.
Correct.
So if there is any deviation, any anomaly, or anything where we would still want to be doubly sure of whether the machine is doing the right job or not,
Correct.
the human element is deployed, right?
So I
Which
have a
brings a certain amount of
question.
sensitivity. Sorry, go on.
Right. So there's a question that kind of crops into this is that obviously, based on certain rules that have been fed into this robotic process, there will always be
Yeah,
exceptions. And to process these exceptions that are to that rule, because the computer no longer understands how to deal with these exceptions, a human intervention
yes,
would possibly be needed.
yes. So any deviation of the norm, you're correct, right? So any deviation from the norm is what the human sort of looks out for, right?
Correct. Correct.
And that gets flagged. These are small red flags which happen over a period of time, and the machine is still learning, Partha,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the machine is still learning even through that deviation. So now, when enough deviations have happened, and the machine has seen the human perform X task on the deviation, then the machine understands that that deviation and the action on the deviation becomes a norm,
Right. But
right?
even that has to be
So
taught to the
that becomes part.
machine.
That also, yeah. So that also has to be put into the process of the machine. It's kind of like training a little kid,
Right.
right? In the initial stage, you sort of hold their hand and you take them through their life journey,
Right.
and then there are times when they sort of push back and say, hey, I can do this on my own. It's like riding a cycle. I can
Correct.
do this on my own. You're still running after the child because the child's on the cycle.
Right.
You're there. You're just scared that the child might fall, um, and and if the child does fall, you're there to sort of just take care of him, right? Um, but over a period of time, what happens is the independence of the child sort of goes up, which is the same way with machines, right? Independence of that machine being able to take decisions, predicating on the decisions that were taken by the human. Sorry, a complex statement, but it's essentially decisions being taken by the human, which the machine learns as right or wrong, and that becomes part of the process. So that's still not artificial intelligence. That's still process driven, right? There's a
Correct.
certain amount of learning, but it's essentially a machine's ability to look at repetitive things
Right.
and look at those repetitive things in a way where they become norm.
So it creates a pattern of cause and effect, and it sees this is the
Yes,
cause by pattern, so this is the effect by pattern.
yes. Now the larger question of artificial intelligence, I mean, and it's murky waters because we don't really, I mean, so artificial intelligence brings alive so many different conversations, right?
Right.
A machine talking to you, understanding your emotions, being able to respond in almost a human-like manner,
Right.
all those things. Movies have glamorized it. Deep fake has happened. Very, 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 very difficult to sort of know where things lie. There's a bunch of that. So let's keep that aside for just a little bit, right? Our
Correct.
our still larger discussion, and maybe that's another podcast that we should get into.
Whoa,
But
yeah.
but yeah, but for today's discussion, let's focus on what artificial intelligence really means from an overall automation perspective, which leads to some impacts on people's jobs, right? I
Yes.
think that's broadly the landscape that we were trying to address, right?
Right. So we were basically the question was, robots are coming. Are we going to lose our jobs? that's
Yeah.
that's how we
Uh,
put it when we first discussing it.
yeah. No. So the quick answer to that is, if I was working in a manufacturing setup where I was part of an assembly line, um, and my only skill was to work on just that narrow part of that assembly line, I would be concerned, right?
Right.
And I think people are concerned. And there has been enough action across the table, across industries, where people have lost their means of livelihood because of machines taking over.
Right.
Machines taking over large scale industrial machines, and machines that have deeply been able to become sort of very quickly, they have been able to replace the functions of human beings, and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of human beings have been replaced by sort of much lesser number of machines, right?
And I think you put it very aptly. Like manufacturing is probably the first place where this will happen. Like car manufacturers, right from the Ford era to now BMW and even Tesla, the way they manufacture cars is human touch is only in the final fit and verification, but not in the actual process of putting the car together. Almost everything is
Yeah,
robotic.
absolutely. So there are actually three fields where, or three sectors that have adopted any form of automation or almost AI, which can be character recognition or language processing or machine learning, which is a component of these two. There are three sectors, right? So the first sector is finance. So as I mentioned, insurance, claims, just being able to process papers, scanning of documents, right? Expense, all of that. So you name it, almost every second or third function, where you would have to deploy humans to check, ratify, validate all of it. That has now in some or the other form been put through technology, right? So you don't necessarily have to deploy a lot of people to do some of the more obvious rote tasks which the financial institutions or the sector was doing.
Correct.
Second is automotive, as you mentioned, right? So automotive as an industry has been an early adopter. I think also looking at the scale and complexity and also the size of instruments that they use. So it was kind of a no-brainer there. Telecommunications is another one where there has been significant uh, amount of impact of technology, especially in the form of server upsides, server downsides, virtual machines being deployed, data centers being run more efficiently, more on cloud and on and non-premise devices being pulled together. So telecommunications and IT services. These are two things that have. These are two sectors where again there has been a significant impact of automation, which has led to processes becoming way more efficient, but also a very deep impact on the human lives.
Okay.
And these are the industries where people have had to sort of there's been a larger discussion in terms of what happens to the people who get displaced, and that's a very significant thing.
Sorry, I'm gonna ask you a question for the people who are listening.
Yeah,
I mean, the financial industry implications, like you mentioned about insurance, is very clear. This is a
yeah,
very administrative job. Now you are automating it because it's very mundane, it's very robotic, quite literally,
yeah.
and so they were able to
Yeah.
automate it. Manufacturing is a no-brainer, like you mentioned, but how is like even your ITES or IT services, because those were inherently driven by code anyway. So how can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So think of it from this perspective that a very large scale server being set up where you have, let's say, multiple servers connected to each other. There is downtime. There are people who are constantly monitoring things. There are people who are constantly filing logs. And these, we are talking about the L0, L1 guys who are essentially sitting away on a computer, looking at what's happening across data centers, looking at what's happening across process driven, again, data applications. Uh, and, and now suddenly we have the opportunity where virtual machines are being deployed. You don't necessarily need someone to sit on a computer and look at whether the server is going to crash, or is there a challenge there? Am I facing, let's say, a possible downtime? Is there a heating issue? Isn't there a heating issue? And all of that, right? So
Hmm.
there, the human intervention, especially from an ITES perspective, imagine a situation where there was a call center, right? I mean, look at it from that perspective also, right?
Okay.
Imagine a situation where there's a call center, which essentially helps support offshore clients to solve their uh, solve their technology queries, right?
Okay.
You have a lot of that software being deployed. You have a bunch of people who are sitting somewhere else who are essentially there to solve your customer queries or your technology queries by taking remote access from the computers and then sort of solving it physically, or getting on the phone and literally talking to you, right? But that was the older model, very very asset heavy, human heavy. People are working through the night, people are working through the day. Very complex, right? Extremely complex, lots of training,
Got it.
right? So that entire thing. Take that away
Mm-hmm.
and now deploy a bot which essentially is able to answer most of your questions, is able to address the challenges that you might face in your software, is able to sort of fix that by itself because it already knows the paths that anyone would have taken to fix a particular challenge, which is
Okay.
the repetitive robotic process that we have just spoken about,
Right,
right?
right, right. Okay.
It's also been able to flag if there is going to be a situation with a server where there is going to be a downtime, and because it's a virtual machine, it's able to bring in a backup server. And by doing that, it ensures that your process runs smoothly with almost 99% uptime, right? And you don't need a
Interesting.
human being to sort of come and fix that. Uh, Very, very strong implications, Partha, across the length and breadth where very large organizations depend on very large data processing units, humans who are sitting in those data processing units, human to human data processing, or sorry, human to human connection or transfer of data. And all that, honestly, is now probably a code away, being deployed very skillfully.
Correct. And with few errors, because human error
Oh,
in
absolutely, absolutely. With way fewer errors, with way more efficiency across where no breaks, no reason for and I don't want this to sound dystopian, right? I mean, as much as we do need humans to sit and have a job and do a lot of things, and that's super important. And I want to talk about that a little bit, which is the need for upskilling and then
yeah.
reskilling them. But there were certain jobs which were not intellectually enriching. There were certain jobs which were essentially just completely rote. They would not enable people to rise up. Uh, and that also was leading to larger inefficiencies across industries. So let's
Right.
understand that that by itself is a fundamental challenge that needs to be solved. One is an industry level challenge, and second is the human upskilling challenge, which is something that I believe companies are going to be investing in very, very significantly over the next decade.
Correct.
And that is primarily where the technology piece of it sits. So let's
Correct.
make industries more efficient. Let's make them way more profitable. Let's make sure that processes are being done better. And at the same time, let's make sure that people are getting the necessary skills and training uh, that enables them to do other things which they otherwise would not have done, considering they would have only been doing that one process over and over and over again.
So now this leads me to a question that I have been mulling over for some time now, right?
Yeah.
Learning how to do something really well and then actually growing within that industry means having to start at a certain level. So are we raising the bar for that level? Because I'm going to give you a little bit of an example myself. So now what happens in the PR or even digital marketing is
Yeah.
that you come in and you do a lot of the tracking online. You go in and you post messages, you figure out, and now a lot of that can be done by bots. So I'm saying that, are we missing out on that entire low level learning, the level zero, level one sort of learning that you're talking about, right? Even in manufacturing or even in financial services, like the low level understanding of how these systems work and how the processes work, because we are literally jumping the gun to and taking for granted that these systems are already robotic, are already automated. And now we have to learn from the level two sort of situation wherein a lot of human intervention is probably needed. So are we missing out on that learning? Is that what's going to happen eventually?
That, that's actually a very interesting way of putting it, right? Um, I'll, I have a theory on this one. I'm going to go back to a point when I started in advertising. Um, there was this idea of layouts being made by hand, right? To some extent, you would still sort of sketch things out, draw them out. It would take you some time to find the right kind of photographs and references. And now where we are is a situation where everything is literally a click away. So someone dirting their hands, someone going through that very deep rooted sort of physical learning curve,
Yeah.
um, that has been taken away to some extent. Now let's not be dismissive of the fact that technology is still also a curve, right? There is still some learning there.
Yeah, but that is a
Let's
different
not take
kind
that
of
away.
learning. It's a different kind of learning. It's
It's a
not going
different
to be the
kind of
same thing.
learning, but having said that, it's still learning, right? And over a period of time, I think we have evolved in terms of the way we learn or the kind of things that we are willing to learn or the kind of things that we enjoy learning anymore. There was a time when you would enjoy the fact that you could sit and probably speak to 10 people and do a consumer research, right? Is there merit in doing that still? Yes. But now imagine you can do a consumer research at a click of a button. Uh, with with a much larger cohort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's joy and delight in that. It's just that now you're looking at a questionnaire which is kind of self-serve, and you are having less and less sort of engagement with your customers.
Right.
That's actually one of the things that we face very deeply when we look at consumer tech. I mean, how do you still deeply humanize technology? How do you still bring in that idea that there is a certain amount of empathy which is there only from a human to human? If you keep deploying tech on top of it, which is tech to human, do you really get that kind of response? And and that's a tricky bit. Let's talk about skills. From a skills perspective, yes. Do we need to learn new things? 100%. Is it as engaging and as interesting as what people were learning probably a decade back? Um, I would argue yes. I think it's way more exciting. Anyone who's joining the work field right now is being exposed to not just one way of looking at things, is being exposed to multiple ways of looking at things. I
Right.
I am a diehard sort of optimist when it comes to the impact of technology and the kind of tectonic shifts that one can see, where people are learning more, they're being able to grasp more. I worked in edtech for a while, and in edtech, I have seen the ability for people in remote areas to learn so much more than they could, right? And these are people who are getting ready for the workforce, Partha.
Right.
They are being exposed to technology, to machines, to the idea where they're engaging way better. They are not scared. There is the learning curve is way shorter. Uh, so yes, I think it's a fantastic time where people are being able to let go of some of the tasks that we would find very, very difficult to do in the initial stages. They just take that for granted because that's been well automated to some extent, or that's been made easier. But the next level of tasks that they're entering it with so much more clarity, and they're entering it with so much more exposure. I think it's a fabulous time. It's a fabulous time across industries.
All right. So now we're into the fag end of this discussion that we have. Is again a two-pronged question. One is, are we seeing so the new generation of people who are coming in are obviously learning a whole new set of skills, and they are
Yeah.
obviously better equipped because they are younger, they're more efficient, they've learned from a set of systems that are already in place, and it's easier for them to kind of grow with what's going to happen in the future. And
Yes.
the people who are, well, like you and me, we've had to upskill ourselves the hard way and make ourselves more relevant. So where is that
Yeah.
right now, and where do you see it going in the future?
Uh, it's going to be a tussle there, Partha. It's a tussle between you being a manager and you actually doing a lot of things, right? So to be a manager, you need to understand the technology.
Hmm.
Uh, so let me contextualize this a little bit. I manage a fairly decently sized team. I am. I also have people who are well much better at data analytics than I am, because that's their core forte. They understand the tools a little bit better than I do, but I know what I need out of it. So when we look at skill sets, there is a certain skill set which is an execution level skill set, and then there is something which only experience brings. I think
The
I think
strategic level.
if the convers yeah, the strategic learning, what essentially life teaches you, yeah.
Hmm.
You know, so 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 at a certain stage, I think as long as we are aware the of what the technology is going to enable us to do, not necessarily getting into doing it ourselves, but
Okay.
knowing what that technology is going to enable us to do, what that technology enables us to deliver to our stakeholders, what value can I add to my organization, to the industry, to my consumers by deploying the technology and finding people who can work with that technology.
Hmm.
I think that's really where the the sort of advantage for people at a certain stage in their career life. And here again, we are not talking about the assembly line workers, right? Here we're talking about middle to senior management. So middle to senior management being trained on the advantages of technology, being trained on the advantages of automation, being trained on the advantages of relying on machines and working alongside machines and not against them,
Hmm.
right? And nurturing nurturing their current skill sets by adding on that layer, I think that's really where the opportunity lies for a very, very large set of executives and middle level managers to senior managers.
Okay.
The thing changes a little bit if we were to look at, again, the assembly lines, the non-intellectual, the non sort of creative lines of work. If we were to look at that, then there is a challenge, and that challenge is being addressed by, I think, organizations who are skilling those workers to do a few set of things which will make them future ready.
Correct.
There are enough organizations who are doing that. If the organization itself cannot do it, then there are third party organizations which are completely dedicated to the idea of skilling large sets of the workforce and making them future ready in some or the other form.
All right.
Because there are industries which need different kinds of skills.
Correct.
Energy is a very large industry which is now being invested in very, very strongly. And I think there is a massive opportunity there, right? So renewable energy, new forms of energy, so on and so forth.
All right.
And so people are getting jobs there. People are getting jobs in healthcare. People are definitely going to keep getting jobs in infrastructure. Technology by itself is another opportunity where people are going to get jobs. So, I mean, interesting statistic here, right? 15% of the global workforce, let's say from 2016 to 2030, we are looking at almost 15% of the global workforce being displaced by some form of automation.
Ouch.
Okay, it's a staggering number, right? So this is a McKinsey report. We are looking at some almost 400 million odd workers between 2016 to 2030 who are going to be displaced. Hold that thought, because we are also going to have to reflect on what happened in the 1970s, 1980s, early stages, right? Where we had, hardware came in, software came in, new enterprises were formed, new kinds of services were being provided online, so on and so forth, right? So we're looking at a technology shift that had happened at that time, right?
Right.
So the early 80s, where there was enough sort of industrial, institutionalized technology shift that was happening, and that created a lot of jobs, right? So we're talking about the early days when IT companies were just starting off, right?
Right.
So a whole lot of jobs, probably one of the larger job categories that happened. Similarly, we're going to have sectors where more jobs are being created because of the advent of technology. Because now imagine a situation where more people would want to be in healthcare because, well, life expectancy is increasing. You are being able to get more healthcare practitioners on board because you're able to deploy education for healthcare and to practice healthcare by the virtue of having technology that enables you to do that across remote areas. Earlier, a person sitting in an area where they could not probably imagine studying to be an engineer now can suddenly be an engineer, right? Because technology enables you to do that. Imagine social enterprises where people would want to go and work but could not work because how would you collect data? How would you analyze that data, right? How would you assess that data? How would you visually represent that data? But that's being made easier. So social enterprises and social impact enterprises are coming up. You have at this moment a world where technology is enabling almost every field to lower the entry barrier, to enable people to do more than they imagined they could do. Technology is at this moment, while slightly alienating, also the most comforting thing that a lot of people who want to start off in that field, that's the larger comfort that these guys are getting. That, hey, I have this technology at my disposal, which enables me to do things much better, much faster. I'm able to learn more and I'm able to handle the changes in this industry way better. I think that's really where the inflection point is. We are not looking at a situation where people are just losing their jobs. That's okay. They are going to be upskilled. They're going to be integrated into the systems. They are going to be put in different industries, and it's our moral social responsibility to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the opportunities that different fields offer, just because of the kind of technology that is being deployed on top of them, is immense. It's absolutely immense. Um, that's really where I stand. When I look at what's happening to a workforce, where are people going to be? It's about the steps that you're going to take, right? Self learning is definitely way easier right now as compared to what it was earlier.
Okay.
The only other thing that one needs to look at, and all this sounds very hunky dory, it sounds very promising, but there is a caveat, right? And the caveat is that any evolution of technology needs to be looked through a lens of human rights. It needs to be looked through a lens of cultural impact. It needs to be looked through a lens of civic regulations, certain economic submissions.
Right.
What? So, so there's a certain degree of sort of responsibility on the political systems, responsibility on the large scale enterprises and corporates uh, to ensure that deployment of technology is done while keeping in mind that human beings need to be, it's human first and machine second still, right?
Right.
So if it's still going to be human first and machine second, then the impact on culture, the impact on the health of the human,
Right.
which is both mental and physical, right? The emotional acceptance of what automation brings. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so technology, unfortunately, is a very it's a very unknown thing, right? It's a very alien thing. It's a deep it's something that you don't necessarily can put a face to, right? Or any emotion to.
There is another aspect of this that we're probably kind of missing in this entire conversation
Mm.
is obviously, like, while it is the responsibility of companies and the political system and all to create these kind of opportunities for for the people who are potentially going to lose, whatever opportunities they have.
Yeah, displaced, let's just say, yeah.
Yeah, let's just, okay, so they will be displaced, and this is
Mm.
inevitable, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But what about the aptitude and anxiety on the part of the person being displaced to, having the ability to actually take on something new that is putting them out of their comfort zone and then having to kind of pick up something new right out of the box?
There's no right answer to this, right?
Yeah, I just want your
It
opinion on it, obviously, because we're all about opinions at this point. And obviously, there will be
uh,
counter opinions, and we are happy to build that debate. And we want that discussion to kind of have.
I'm going to be honest. It's not easy, right?
Right.
To tell someone that they need to develop a new set of skills and learn something new after they have been doing something for the last 20 odd years, maybe more in some cases,
Hmm.
just because they need to earn a livelihood and they will be out of a job. It's a deeply disturbing and a very, very complicated thing to do.
Correct. So there is a
Uh,
lot of
it
anxiety involved there, a tremendous amount of anxiety.
Definitely, very, very deep-rooted anxiety. Extremely, extremely difficult to navigate across cultures. Extremely difficult to navigate across countries. Very difficult to navigate when there is such a disparity in terms of what they were earning and what they might earn in the initial stages, because we don't really know, right? We don't really know what kind of a job they're going to end up getting, right?
Right.
We have had conversations around equal wages and unified wages and stuff like that. But having said that, we don't really know where that is really going to go and sit. Uh,
Hmm.
but 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 to sort of look at it from the larger perspective, the opportunity will be there for them to skill. The opportunity will be there for them to embrace it. Their the security that they need, right? That this is going to work.
Hmm.
I think that's really where deep humanization of it has to happen. It cannot be done machine to machine, right? It cannot be that suddenly you're forced into a situation where you're put in front of a computer and you're expected to learn something. It can't be, right? There still has to be a very strong uh, perspective towards humanizing that entire approach. Give you
Hmm.
an example, right? And I think we have a few minutes. Let's take an example of refugees coming across the border, right? And it's a kind of an interesting space to look at.
Perfect example.
Sorry.
That's a perfect
Yeah,
example.
yeah. So let's look at refugees coming across the border. Political asylum. We are looking at a situation where they were probably, well, farmers, fishermen, maybe had their own sort of vineyards, whatever it is, right? They were leading a beautiful life, or they were not leading a beautiful life, but they have been displaced, right? Um, so don't want to be don't want to be flippant about it, but at the end of the day, these are people who don't have a home anymore,
Right.
right? they don't have means to a livelihood anymore, right? And there are countries who are well generous and welcoming enough to take them on and say, hey, welcome into our little world. And we are going to try and get you integrated into the workforce, because you getting integrated in the workforce is a great opportunity for us, because we get diversity of people, we get diversity of culture, and maybe different ways of doing something. Now, if you're a skilled worker, let's assume that you are a very skilled carpenter, you're a very skilled painter, you're a very skilled electrician, so on and so forth. You will find a job much easier, right? Uh,
Right.
but but let's assume you're none of that. Now it's incumbent on the state to give you that skill set, right? It's on me. I have to make sure that in some or the other form, as a state, as a regulatory power there, I end up skilling you. And now there are multiple bodies who are skilling people to get integrated in the workforce. The question that needs to be asked here is that, are we skilling them with skills that are relevant today, or are we skilling them with skills that will make sure that if there was an automation or any kind of process, so if there was a process automation or any kind of machine that was deployed to do the same work that they do, they've already gone through one layer of displacement. Can they go through another one? Right? So what happens to the human spirit at that point when people have already been displaced once, and then we are not future ready, or we are not making them future ready, and then let's say in a decade or so, they get displaced again because of something happens, because of what happens, right? From a technology perspective,
Right.
it's a deeply complex challenge, and I don't know if we have an answer to that. I do know that there are lots of organizations who are working towards that.
Yes.
I don't know if the answer is on the table, but it's something to really recognize, because there is displacement happening. People are going to be out of jobs. People will need to be skilled. Are we skilling them to make them future ready, or are we skilling them? And by future ready, I mean there is an assurance that for the next 2-3 decades, nothing is going to happen to their jobs or what they do. Or are we saying there is going to be a tectonic shift even in a decade, and you have already gone through one displacement, there's going to be another one and then another one. The human spirit crumbles. I'm not so sure that people are ready for that.
Wow. Okay. On that somber note, I think that we will have to kind of leave this discussion here. But it definitely opens up a lot of questions for future discussion, and we would like to get the listeners' opinions on this as well, and kind of start up a conversation on Twitter. Um, so, Samriddh, how can a person get in touch with you regarding any thoughts or feedback on, our opinions
Uh,
on this
I
space?
am I am Samriddh D on Twitter. It's SAMRIDDHD on Twitter, and that's actually the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. I will obviously link all of these contact information in the show notes, and you can reach out to East Podcast on host@eastpodcast.in, or you can visit the website, that's eastpodcast.in. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode. I had a lot of insightful understanding around this topic of upskilling and where we are, what we could look forward to, and it's obviously a very very emotional conversation as well. And we hope to pick up on a very similar note in our future podcast. And Samrit will be visiting this podcast in the future. So thank you very much for joining us again today, Samrit, and I will catch you in the next one.
My pleasure, Partha. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
I will have a good evening, and I will speak to you soon. Take care.
Take care. Bye.